and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, talking all things leadership. And we are back after taking a little bit of a summer break for the start of our fourth season, right? This is season number 4. So we've been here a little while, and we want to thank you for joining us, whether you are watching live on LinkedIn or on the replay, watching on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, do all the things there, and also on Facebook and on the Shifting into Action business page. So wherever you are watching, we want to thank you, live or Memorex, for those of you who are old enough to remember that reference. Are you saying, wow, you don't remember that reference? You're muted.
I do remember that reference. Wow. Most people won't remember that. Are they still around even?
I don't, you know what? They're probably one of the companies that didn't pivot, right? And yeah, well, you can look it up. I don't know.
I'll look it up.
We'll somebody can look it up. Let us know. We'll hashtag Memorex and see if Memorex responds.
Yeah, they may have just been dissolved, or they may have been absorbed into the body.
Something. So and if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it, right? And see if you can find there's probably, if you go on LinkedIn, not on LinkedIn, if you go on YouTube, there are probably old time commercials or something from it. So anyway, we thank you for being here, watching live and replays. And so we are going to start this first episode of our 4th year talking about rewards and expectations, performance, behaviors, etc. And what are you doing that is rewarding in one direction when you are expecting or hoping for something in a different direction? And this topic came up. Robert and I, for those of you who don't watch the show regularly, Robert and I meet once a week outside of the show to connect. We're on both coasts of the United States, and so we are business partners in some on some projects, and so we don't work we're not co-located, right? And so we get together once a week to connect, to stay in touch, and then to talk about the projects that we're on, and to make sure that the topics that we are covering week to week are things that are relevant for you as a leader. And we were just catching up in our last conversation, and I was sharing some training that I had done over our summer break from the State of Leadership, right? Didn't mean we weren't working in other ways or doing other things. And so I'd done some training for new managers, and there was this recurring theme that kept coming up, which was that the things that we were training on, they didn't see necessarily the connection to the end result that they wanted, right? Because, and here's the thing, and I was a little outdone by hearing this, particularly from multiple organizations, that the outcomes that are laid out, right, sort of the progressive discipline and what's laid out, that progressive discipline isn't carried out to the end. and what it brought up. And I'll share some of the specific examples in just a bit. But what it brought up for me was something that I studied when I was studying organizational behavior and leadership. We probably studied this in our master's program as well, but there was a very specific article that I read in my undergrad program called The Folly of Rewarding A, Hoping for B. And it just rang a bell. And so we started talking about it and thought, well, you know, this will be a nice topic, because this is something that happens a lot. And it happens in business, it happens in our personal lives, right?
Yeah.
Where we are actually rewarding the behavior that we don't want, right? So we're offering up rewards, hoping that it will lead to what we want, but it's actually rewarding the wrong behavior. So we're going to dig into that today, and hopefully it will be something that if it rings a bell, we'll share some ways that you can turn that around, right? And if you're not doing it, to make sure that you have some strategies that will keep you from going down that path. Robert, some opening thoughts?
No, this is a great topic to talk about. I think we were laughing a little bit when we were kicking around some ideas when it came to this, because we both you had one from your facilitation when you were training, and I had one that I personally lived. And they're funny now that they're over, but at the time you're like, what are you thinking? Like, what are you hearing what you're saying? So I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah. So I think where we can start is, and I'll share, if you're interested in reading the article, I don't remember what year it's from, but if you Google it, you can find it on the internet. It's called On the Folly of Rewarding A While Hoping for B. And it's written by Stephen Carr. I don't think it's the coach for the Warriors.
Probably not.
I don't think it's him, but his name is Steve Carr, right? Steve Kerr. So I don't think it's the same person, because this was an academic article. But if you want to find it and read it, you can certainly do that. It is considered a classic in management literature. And again, it's about how organizations are unintentionally rewarding the behaviors that they don't want, while hoping for something else. And this was coming up because we were talking about expectations, right? And having clear expectations, communicating expectations with your team members. And we talk about this quite a bit here on the State of Leadership. Your clear communication lets people know what they are supposed to be doing, right? I don't know if, I think we haven't had an episode since I heard this. I was at an event, and one of the speakers said, the greatest gift you can give someone is the gift of clear communication.
That's powerful.
Right. And I had not stopped to think about that. And it's so true in personal life, professional life, when we are clear about what we want, what we expect, what we don't want, right? And recognizing that a communication about expectation is a two-way street. Both parties, or however many parties are involved, if it's a team of more than two, everyone should be a part of the discussion of what expectations are. And then you come to a consensus or an agreement about how you move forward, so that everyone does their part. And when you don't do that, what you get is chaos, right? You get chaos.
Can you repeat that quote? I think that was one of the deepest things I've heard in a while.
She said, the Greatest gift you could give someone is the gift of clear communication.
I love that.
And I don't know if that was original to her or if she got that from somewhere else. So, and I don't remember her name at the moment, so I can't attribute it. But if you like it, you, Robert, or our listener, you can look it up and see if it comes from somewhere.
I will look it up.
Or if she was just brilliant.
It could be a combination of both.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I think so. We didn't really talk about a lot of our episodes. We don't plan. We just kind of come up with a topic and then we shoot from the hip. So how do you think we should kick this off when we start talking about this?
So I am willing to share the example. I will not get into detail. I think it applies it's a general enough example that it applies to a lot of companies. And so I don't want to call out any particular entity, but again, we were talking about expectations, and over the course of the 2 days of the training that we're doing, we're having exercises and examples, and the trainees are sharing the challenges that they are having in their workplace. And on day 2, we're talking specifically, moving our conversation into discipline, and making sure that one of the things that gets brought up, I'm a lawyer, is documentation, right? And how important documenting each and every incident, your conversations, the behaviors, the performance, lack of performance, and both good and bad, positive and negative, right? You should be documenting what's happening with your employees. You should be having regular conversations with them, one-on-ones, informal conversations, formal conversations, and in particular, when it comes to either behavior issues or work performance issues, you want to make sure that you're documenting and that you lay out whatever your company's policy and process is, right? And for the most part, what we get are verbal warnings, written warnings, right? You written documentation. And then if the behavior doesn't change, however many times you said you're going to give this a shot, you end up on a performance improvement plan. And then, right, there's a time frame in which that needs to turn around. If it doesn't, then, right, it's the legal language is generally up to discipline, up to and including termination. And what kept coming up is that these companies were not terminating, right? And I'm not saying that that and it's not threatening. It is a consequence, right? And we had this conversation in the training. It is not that if you don't do this, we're going to fire you. It is, here's what we expect of you, right? You're communicating. Do you understand? Here's what I need you to do in order to turn this around, making sure you have the resources, the tools, the support from me as your manager, etc. Do you understand, right? We're having this conversation. At some point, you agree that this is the way. What was happening is that they're going through the process, but no one was getting fired. And so because no one was getting fired, not that you should be in fear of your job, but you should be clear that if you're not doing your job, that what you've chosen ultimately is to not have that job.
Correct.
Right. And so, as it was said by more than one person in the training, we don't fire anyone. You lose. And it was like all I could do to. I was like, okay, so you let people know that this is a consequence, and then you never follow through on that consequence. But what was happening was that they were removing, and there was a particular example where they were removing responsibilities from a particular employees, from the breadth and from their job description, right? They were taking things, he wasn't performing the job up to par, and so they started removing those tasks and
So they were actually
responsibilities.
rewarding that person for
And so and that's exactly what I said. So I was like, so what you're if I'm hearing you correctly, you're rewarding this person for not doing their job. And sort of the
realization.
tenor in the room was kind of like, oh snap. Right? I was like, so what, just making sure I understand this. You're telling me that you're rewarding this person for not doing their job. And then I asked, what happened to the job duties that person had? They tend to go to the high performers.
Wow. So you're
Right?
punishing the people that are doing their job really well and rewarding the people that aren't doing the
Yes.
job up to par.
Yes.
Wow.
And then they're wondering why they have low morale
And turnover, probably.
and turnover. Yes. Low morale and turnover, right? So your employees are being rewarded for not doing, some employees are being rewarded for not doing their job. Other employees are being punished for doing their job. And then those in between are watching what's going on, and they're like, what's going on here? Why am I here? When is something like this going to happen to me, right? That I'm going to take on more than is my total responsibility, or they start slacking, right? It's like, well, if I don't have to do my job and I'm not going to lose my job, why am I working so hard?
Right.
And so again, I was like, okay, why are we doing this and how can we change it? So any thoughts on that before we sort of step into maybe some things that could fix it, or if you want to share your example?
Oh, I have a couple of examples. I'll start with in line with this. When I was working in another organization, and we had a pretty robust, what we thought, corrective action policy, where it was laid out the way you talked about it. You had the verbal warning first, then you had your first written warning, second warning, and then your final warning. And then if things didn't, your final warning stayed on file, stayed active. I shouldn't say stayed on file forever, but it stayed active for a year, and then it became inactive. So if you did the same infraction within a year, you were terminated, right? And then if you didn't do that infraction again, and a year passed, it stayed in your file, but it was inactive. You couldn't be fired for that. You started all over again. It recycled. But what happened was some managers were, and we made a joke about this, and it's funny now. Was it funny? It was kind of funny then. Well, what some managers were doing was, when it came to the final warning, they would ignore if that person was well liked, or maybe they were afraid of that person too, because sometimes that happens. They would give them not the final warning. They would have a final warning, then they would get a final warning. So they would get another final warning. And then they got the next time it happened, they got what we called the final, this time I really mean it warning. So, and then they would fire them after that. And they were like, no, you can't do that. Because if you're, one of the reasons why this is in place is to create standards and fairness.
And accountability.
Because if you're not firing this person because you like that person, or they're a nice person, or you're afraid of this person, because
yes,
that happens too. Well, but the other person you're not afraid of, or you don't particularly like, or they're not, and you do the corrective action the way that it's supposed to go, you created an imbalanced situation. You're not being fair. You're not being, equitable. You're what's the purpose of having it? And so it was creating a similar situation, not as bad as rewarding certain people that didn't deserve to be rewarded, but it was creating the situation where people were being terminated or looked at or judged more leniently than other people. And so it created a problem, and we had to address that. But it was like, well, we have this process in place. Stick to the process. And if you're having conversations with people in between their performance appraisal, they should know what they're doing well.
Yes.
They should know if there are issues or not. You don't wait until an issue, you don't wait until they're 2 feet from the brick wall before you say, hey, there's a brick wall coming up, right? So you bring it to their attention when it looks like there's going to be a problem down the line. But these managers weren't doing that. Some managers are very busy. I get that, but that's part of the gig as well.
Right. That, another part of the example I shared was that, and I asked this question. So do these people get raises? And the particular entity that we had the majority of this conversation around, it was quasi-government. I would describe it that way, quasi-government, not wholly a governmental entity. And this happens in governmental entities a lot. I work for government. I work with clients in government, and we know from our interactions with people in government that there's sometimes, not everybody, not 100%. And so if you're a government employee and you still have a strong work ethic, I'm not talking about you if I'm not talking about you, right? But it starts to be in government a culture of sort of not rising to the occasion, rising to expectations, because it is so difficult for people to get fired. And in our conversations about this, you brought up unions, right? It happens a lot in places where there are unions and there are the protections of the union. And so it is easier, right, for management, for leadership to make the decision not to terminate people for whether it's fear of the person specifically, fear of the union, fear of litigation, whatever it is. It's easier to let things go than to address them, than to hold people accountable for doing their jobs. And, some of what we talked about in the training wasn't, in the grand scheme of things, may not have been the worst behaviors. Sometimes it's about tardiness or absenteeism, right? And I would say in my work experiences throughout my career, the blessings of not having to punch a time clock for the vast majority of my work life. When I punched a time clock, and I have had jobs where I had to do that, I would say I was much more punctual, right? Because someone knew when I got there and whether or not I was at the job ready to work, right? So that's one of those things where we pay attention. And this goes in the context of something we talk about often here from Simple, right? Our framework of leadership, Simple: self-awareness, intentionality, mastery, purposefulness, leverage, and energy. And intentionality, being very intentional about what you're asking of people, what you're expecting of them, having the conversations, and when you're asking for something, having taken the time to think about why you are asking for that particular thing, right? And so being on time, right, or having people report to work at a particular time when you're in a team setting and other people are dependent upon you in order to get the work done, it matters that you show up on time, right? I have had jobs where what really mattered was that the work got done. It didn't matter that I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning to start my workday. If I showed up at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, it wasn't a big deal, right? It was me doing the work. When I was a lobbyist, reading the bills, writing analysis, when I scheduled meetings, etc. That's very different than when I waited tables. If I wasn't on time waiting tables, right, somebody else would have to do whatever if I was part of the opening crew, someone else had to take that work on. And so rewarding me by not holding me accountable for that and then giving me raises or choice shifts or whatever it was, right? You have to be very intentional and take a step back and look at what am I expecting? What am I rewarding? Right? What is the behaviors that I'm getting and what am I doing that rewards that? And again, being a manager, being in leadership is simple, not necessarily easy, but it does require you to be proactive in what you're doing. And it takes, it's time intensive and energy intensive. And so you can't let those things slide because you have other things to do. And, we spend a good amount of time talking about that as well. Particularly managers who have their own work product to do. It's very easy to just do the things that need to get done. So we're talking, right, you're approving timesheets and vacations and, some of those technical things, logistical things. And then not being proactive in what actually helps you create a strong team. And it is the proactive nature of what you do that makes the difference for you. The discipline part, the correcting behaviors, right? That's an outcome of, for the most part, not in absolutely every single situation, but for the most part, it's an outcome of not being proactive and clear in your communications, your expectations, and then holding people accountable.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. You have to have that discipline in order to set up time to do those things, because what tends to happen is, while the day-to-day of a manager's job is important and it can be very stressful when you have all the, like you said, your work product that needs to get done, these other things tend to creep up and cause even bigger problems later on because you tend to put them off. I have worked with managers that they didn't realize they were creating a problem by not looking at having conversations about performance until it became a real big issue. I like I like my analogies and looking at, it's like, your personal health, right? You get a checkup.
Yes.
If you don't get a checkup, you don't wait until there's an issue. And then you try to take care of it, because you can't undo. Once the bell is rung, it can't be unrung. You have to go ahead and be proactive with those things so that you are heading off things at the past. You're making sure that employee is not developing habits that are going to be detrimental for them. So although it may take an extra amount of discipline and scheduling on the manager's part, it is well worth it to do it. I used to tell managers, look, I remember, and I know we're talking, this is a little bit off topic, but it's related. I used to counsel managers on performance appraisals. And there were managers that would wait until they were due to start thinking about their employees' behavior. And what I would tell them to do is, look, you have a whole year to plan this thing. Say you have 5 employees. Keep a little file of those 5 employees. And when they do something good, put a note, put the date, put, what the situation was, the task, action, result was, put a date there, positive or negative. If they do something good, put that in there. If they do something, negative, put that in there. Have those discussions with them about, have that feedback discussion with them. And then when it's time, do you do a little bit of this every week? So when it's time for the performance appraisal, you open up that file and here is all your narrative of the year. And you don't have to be racking your brain. You don't have to give in to the recency bias. You don't have to, all this other stuff. You have everything you need, and you will, the two managers that did that, they were done well before everybody else. And everyone was like, well, how did you get this done? They were like, well, I listened to the advice that I got. And and so when it was performance appraisal time, I didn't have to struggle. I had all my stuff ready. I just put everything in there. I just basically copied and pasted and put a couple of little extra things in it, and I was done. But finding that time, the real challenge is finding that time to do that.
Yeah. You know, that's such a good point. That goes back to the document, good, bad, otherwise, right? And if you just get in the habit of doing that, then it's there and available for you. And I think there's a concern that documenting means that you're setting people up for, performance improvement plans, or setting them up for failure or whatever. And no, because you're going to use what you document in the positive as well, right? So when it's time to justify someone's raise above and beyond, right, a COLA or the average that is going to the employees in your organization, how do you justify something above and beyond that? Through what you've documented, right? What gets measured gets rewarded, right? And so paying attention to that, I think, makes a huge point. And as you were talking, I was like, oh, there's a topic that I don't think we've talked about, which is sort of time management and routines and cycles, and how to, look at what happens through your organization, the routines and cycles, and how you can set yourself up for success as things ebb and flow throughout the year. And so I wrote that down as something for us to explore as a future episode. And I want to say this, that all of the reward and misalignment of reward is not all on the negative side, right? It was that example that brought this topic up, but there are other things that we are rewarding that is not getting us what we truly desire. So if you think about how sometimes we say, we're a team, and but we reward individuals for their contributions rather than rewarding the collaborative efforts, right? If you don't reward collaboration, if you don't reward people for what they do to make the team, then if you're rewarding individuals, they're going to continue to do individual behaviors or things that move in that direction. So again, it's about asking the question, what is it that I want? What am I trying to achieve? And then looking at whether or not you are rewarding what you actually want, so that you don't have those unintended consequences. So it starts with being clear, again, about expectations, right? Being really explicit about the behaviors and the outcomes that you want to see. And then making sure that your employees understand not just what's expected of them in terms of the result, but also the processes and the attitudes that you're valuing: teamwork, innovation, right? Are you valuing ethical behavior, or are you rewarding ethical behavior? Are you rewarding unethical behavior? Right. And sometimes we don't stop and think about that. If people are being rewarded for doing the wrong thing, right, ethically speaking, morally speaking, if they are rewarded for that, why would there's no incentive for them to change that. And how do you do that? You do that, as Robert said, by these frequent conversations, right? Talking about goals, the required behaviors. And it's a conversation. This is not you lecturing at someone. It's having a conversation and making it a dialogue, so that you're talking about behaviors as well as performance and attitudes that create, right? This is about creating the environment that allows for what you really want to flourish.
Absolutely. But in order to do that, in order to create the environment, you have to know what the environment you want to create is. And a lot of people don't know that. Listen, you hear us say this all the time on the show. It's simple, but it's not easy. We know that managers and leaders have a very, very difficult job, especially now with things that are the way things are moving and the complexity and how fast things are changing. However, by instituting some standards for yourself, you can make it a little easier, and in some cases a lot easier. And I think that the fear is that I know some people, and I'll use an analogy that I used to know some musicians that were very good playing just kind of intuitively, and they picked things up by being mentored by other people. And they didn't want to take any lessons because they were worried it was going to change their style. But I was like, well, you're a musician. It's your job to know as much about music as you can so that you can be versatile. It will enhance your style. So it's the same kind of thing. I always tell people the natural way that you do things is always going to be there, right? You learn something else so you have another tool or another way to handle situations. So you're not continually doing the same thing over and over again, because what ends up happening is we say this, said this on the show before. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, or you try to turn everything into a nail.
Right.
So you need to have other tools, other ways to approach things, because eventually the way you approach something will not work. It's not a matter of if it won't work. It's a matter of when. There will become a time when what you're doing will not work. The longer you work, the higher that possibility is.
Absolutely. Right. And there's another probably challenging aspect of this, that the communication piece that has to be had, and the expectation, and that is, regardless of where you are in your organization's hierarchy, having conversation with leadership above you, right? Management above you. Because if there are written policies and procedures, and ultimately those are not followed, and you don't get the authority to hold people accountable to that, what they're doing is, what's the term, hamstringing you, or right? So they are hurting your ability to create trust with your team, because not just the person that may have a performance issue or an attitude, but it creates trust issues with the other members of your team. And what they come to realize is that we can't trust you. We can't trust you to do what you say you're going to do. And if we can't trust you, if I don't know what to expect from you, I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, we can't have a strong performing team, right? Yeah. We cannot have a high functioning team if trust does not exist amongst the team members.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
And so I said this piece, right? What gets measured gets, done. And so you've got to make sure that you're measuring the right things, right? So the first thing was about communications and expectations, and communicating that frequently, often, right? Now we're talking about what are you communicating, all right? What are you measuring? And asking the question again, what is it that I want? What's the outcome that I'm looking for? Am I measuring the right things? Right. So again, the example, if you want teamwork, you've got to foster collaboration and teamwork. Yeah. And you can't just reward individuals. You have to reward the team. And if you're rewarding individuals, then you're rewarding them for their contribution to the team, not their standalone results, right? And so again, you've got to pay attention to what that looks like. How do you keep track? There are all kinds of tools out there, scorecards, metrics. It could be sales numbers. It could
Yeah.
be customer satisfaction, innovation, etc. Right? There are all kinds of metrics that you can bring to bear, but you've got to pick the one that is right for what you're measuring. And then feedback, right, it is another part of measuring things. So getting feedback, 360 reviews, customer surveys, peer reviews, etc. Right, making sure that people are demonstrating the behaviors that you're asking for. You can't see everything, right? You can't monitor everything. And so you've got to get that feedback from other places.
Yes, correct. It is really important, especially that feedback piece. Got to have that feedback. You have to go and have those conversations. And I think we've talked about feedback. It's a back and forth. You have expectations. They may have challenges with that, with what you expect. You won't know that until you have that conversation with them. So it's really important to have that clear line of communication when you're having feedback.
Yes. And then again, we're rewarding the behaviors that you want to see, right? Tie the rewards to the specific behaviors. Tie rewards. So if it's a financial bonus, right, make sure it's tied to the specific behavior. If you're trying to promote positive team dynamics, right, the reward goes to the team who, or the employees who contribute to a positive team dynamic, not one who hits individual targets, right? And so you've got to cull that out. It's not to say that individuals don't get rewarded for their individual, but you need to be specific. This is what this is for. This is right. If they're being individually recognized and rewarded, it's for that individual contribution. If it is about the team, then you need to make sure that there are specific rewards that are for the team. If I know that when I am contributing to the work that I do contributes to a team, then and being rewarded matters to me, I'm more likely to do those things, right?
Absolutely.
And all rewards do not have to be monetary, right? They can be opportunities for leadership. They could be opportunities for mentorship. They could be opportunity time off, or other, an acknowledgement, a kudos, and something on your intranet or your company newsletter, right? There are other ways to reward people. Everything does not have to be monetary.
Absolutely. We sometimes forget that. I like to use the NBA model. The team gets a reward and there's an MVP, right? So you can do it that way. But if you're talking about, and this is something we talk about a lot, if you want collaboration, you got to reward collaboration. You can't say you want collaboration and only give your favorite person or your favorite player an award. So you reward the team, and then if there's somebody that, and what I like to do is, this person gets rewarded because they were the most team player, right? They were the person that was openly collaborating, that was, not just seeking to help themselves, but was going out and helping other people. They were so you look at those different characteristics and you reward that individual for being the most team. That's not the best term.
It's interesting that you brought that up in particularly in the context of the NBA, right? Because every year, like starting before the season even starts. And this may happen in other sports. I don't follow them as closely as the NBA, so I can't speak to them. But before the season even starts, there are these predictions about who's going to be the MVP at the end of the season. And then it's like on a day-by-day, game-by-game basis, there's a constant analysis. And then at some point when the race is tight, people start calling out, well, what does it actually mean to be the most valuable player of a team? Right? Because the early conversations are often about the individual stats of that person. And your individual stats don't matter if they don't help the team. Right? And so like last year, the discussion was Joel Embiid and Jokic from Denver, and Steph Curry and LeBron James, right? Those were the names that were thrown at Anthony Edwards at some point. And it's, well, how well does the team need to be doing in order for this person to be right? If your team doesn't make the playoffs, does your individual contribution, or that you played, had stats above everyone else, if your team is not even in the playoffs, does that matter? You've got an answer? Sure.
I have an answer to that. Your individual play can be hurting the team. You can be scoring so many points, what we used to call in the playground a ball hog, right? That you're hurting the team, right?
Yes.
And that's and I know we're running out of time. And I apologize for, looking at my phone. I have another session right after this, but your individual play could be hurting the team. Just because your numbers are phenomenal doesn't mean that you're helping the team. That doesn't mean that you're the most valuable player. That means you're the player with the most points. And people tend to forget that. I personally love it when the award goes to the person that has the most assists, because they've helped somebody else score. And this is one of those things that we have to really, if you really want your team to be successful and you want individuals to plug into the team, you have to make it very clear about what you're looking for and about what is considered great individual play is great team play. And a lot of people miss that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had an idea. I didn't want to forget.
No, absolutely. I want to cover two more things and then we will wrap this up. Another one, particularly in teams, maybe not so much in the NBA, but in your team, right? Tailoring the rewards to individuals' motivations, which means you need to know your team members' motivations. That means you need to know the people on your team, what matters to them, and then making those rewards align with that. And so that you are, if they're motivated by recognition, giving them recognition. If it is a flexible work schedule or more responsibilities or new responsibilities or shifted responsibilities, or helping them to chart a path to somewhere else they want to go. What is it that matters to them? What is it that motivates them? Where are they going? What do they want? And then tying the rewards to that. And along with that is making sure that you're creating opportunities for them to grow, right? Rewards, again, for training, leadership development, project management, owning, being the champion or the owner of a project. If those are things that will help your people grow and that's what they want, that's another way for you to reward them.
Absolutely.
And then finally, I'll just say being transparent, right? Being transparent about the criteria. You've talked about what you've expected. You've talked about the rewards. You've talked about the consequences. You want to make sure that things are lined up. You just want to be transparent about that, making sure that your people understand the criteria so that if they are doing things in pursuit of, in addition to doing the right thing, doing things the best they can, they are motivated by a reward, a carrot at the end, that they understand how to get the carrot.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not fair to hold things out and then not have them be clear about how they get what it is that they're moving towards in the end. And then sort of tied to that, and I'll let you wrap up, something that Robert said earlier about fairness and equity, right? That you want to make sure that your top performers are appropriately rewarded, that it's not poor performers who get rewarded by having things taken away from them and given to top performers, where you are just piling on, where you're punishing high performers by giving them more work because you're rewarding your low performers.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that this was such a great topic to talk about. I almost said fun because we had some funny examples, but it's not fun when you're going through it.
No. And I've been there, right? I've been
there too, yeah.
Someone who has gotten things put on her plate because someone else, and I was like, well, why aren't you making sure that person's doing their job? Right. And then you're made to feel guilty for not being a team player.
Don't worry about that person. This is not about that person. It's about you. We've heard all the different responses, but I think this was a great topic, and I think one that we should probably revisit at another point.
Would love to. I would love to. So before we go, Robert, if someone wanted to talk to you about accountability, being a better manager, and communicating transparently and communicating those expectations, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach out to me at inspire me at roberthilliardcoaching.com, or just go to my website, Robert Hilliard Coaching. There is a discovery contact form there. Just go ahead and fill that out, and we can have a discovery call, talk about how I can help you reach your goals or overcome your challenges.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to reach out to me, you can do so at shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. I also have an opportunity there for you to schedule a strategy session with me, if that is what you want to do. We also invite you to share topics that you would like to see us cover on the show. So again, thank you for joining us. If you are on YouTube, like, subscribe, share on the other platforms. Feel free to leave a comment. Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. We look forward to seeing you next time. So take care.
Bye now.